June 4th, 1943. The heat in Tennessee does not feel like the heat in North Africa. In the desert, the sun was a hammer that cracked you open. Here at Camp Crossville, the air is heavy, wet. It clings to your skin like a second uniform. Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt stands in line at the camp canteen. He wipes sweat from his forehead with a sleeve that is cleaner than any uniform he wore in Tunisia. Around him, the camp hums with a strange, surreal energy. There is no sound of artillery, no scream of Stuka dive bombers, only the low murmur of men speaking German and the distant, rhythmic thud of an American baseball hitting a leather glove. Burkhardt steps forward. He reaches into the cooler. The water inside is icy, shockingly cold. His fingers close around a glass bottle. It is heavy, ribbed, distinctive. He pulls it out. Coca-Cola. He holds it up to the light. The brown liquid inside is dark, almost black, fizzing with a life of its own. Condensation beads on the glass, running down over his thumb. Cold. For 2 years, Burkhardt had fought across the burning sands of Libya and Egypt. He had lived on dry Italian biscuits that broke your teeth. He had drunk water that tasted of gasoline and dead camels. He had forgotten what cold felt like. Now, here, in the heart of the enemy's country, thousands of miles from the front lines, he holds a bottle of cold, carbonated sugar water. He looks at the guard. A young American corporal chewing gum, leaning casually against the wall. "How much?" Burkhardt asks. The guard holds up 5 fingers. 5 cents. Burkhardt stares. 5 cents. In Germany before the war, a drink like this, if you could even find it, was a luxury for the rich, a treat for a birthday. Here, it is nothing. It is water. The guard tosses a nickel on the counter and laughs. It is the casualness that hurts, the indifference. Burkhardt uses the opener on the side of the cooler. The metal cap hisses. Gas escapes. He lifts the bottle. The smell hits him first. Vanilla, caramel, a chemical sweetness that screams of factories and laboratories. He takes a sip. The bubbles explode on his tongue. The sugar rushes into his blood. It tastes like victory. Not his victory, theirs. He lowers the bottle, and for the first time since his capture, he feels a true, deep terror. This is not just a drink. This is a weapon. Think about the logistics required to put this bottle in his hand. The glass factories, the sugar plantations, the bottling plants in Atlanta, the trains, the trucks, the refrigeration units, the electricity to keep it cold. The United States of America is fighting a 2-front war. They are supplying armies in Europe and the Pacific. They are building thousands of ships and planes, and yet they have enough spare industrial capacity, enough spare ships, enough spare fuel to transport millions of bottles of sugar water to prisoners of war in Tennessee. They are not just winning. They are not even straining. Burkhardt looks around the canteen. Hundreds of German soldiers are drinking Coke, eating chocolate, smoking American cigarettes. They look healthy. They are gaining weight. In Germany, his mother is mixing sawdust into her bread dough to make it last. In Germany, his sister is boiling turnip skins for soup. Here, he is drinking a 5-cent luxury that the Americans treat like tap water. The bottle feels heavy in his hand, heavier than his Mauser rifle ever did, because the rifle offered him a chance to fight. This bottle offers him nothing but the cold, hard truth. Germany is fighting a war against a force of nature, against an industrial monster that can pave the world in aluminum and drown it in sugar. He takes another sip. It is sweet, sickeningly sweet, the taste of the Third Reich's inevitable death, but the death of his ideology had begun weeks earlier. On the Atlantic Ocean, July 1943. The Liberty ship heaves and groans, cutting through the gray swells like a floating factory. On the deck, Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann leans against the railing. The salt spray mixes with a smell he hasn't encountered in 2 years. The smell of cooking grease, the smell of meat, real meat. Not the tinned, processed shit mystery meat of the German rations, but beef, steaks. He watches the kitchen door swing open. Two American sailors step out, carrying a large, galvanized metal garbage can between them. They are laughing. They are young. They look well fed, their cheeks flushed with health, not hollowed by the desert wind. They drag the can to the fantail. Zimmerman watches. He expects them to be dumping ash, or maybe packaging, or slush, but then one of the sailors tips the can. And Zimmerman stops breathing. Out of the can tumbles a waterfall of color, the white fluffy squares of American bread, whole loaves, soft, untouched. Not the dark, brick-hard Kommissbrot that German soldiers broke their teeth on, but bread that looked like cake. Then came the meat, half-eaten steaks, bones with thick layers of fat and gristle still attached. Oranges, bright orange peels and pulp flashing against the gray water. Gallons of milk swirling into the wake. Zimmerman grips the railing until his knuckles turn white. He calculates. In his head, the math of survival takes over automatically. That one loaf of bread could have fed his squad for a day in Tunisia. That slab of beef could have made a soup to feed a platoon. And here in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest farm, the Americans are feeding it to the sharks. Splash, splash, splash. It hits the water and disappears. The American sailors wipe their hands on their trousers, light cigarettes, and walk back inside, leaving the smell of wasted food hanging in the damp air. They didn't do it to be cruel. They didn't do it to mock the prisoners watching from behind the wire. That was the worst part. They did it because they didn't care. To them, food was not precious. It was not life. It was just stuff. Limitless, endless, replaceable. Zimmerman looks at the empty ocean where the food had vanished. He realizes then, with a sinking feeling in his gut that felt heavier than hunger, that the war was not just lost. It was irrelevant. How do you fight a nation that treats steak like garbage? How do you defeat an enemy whose supply lines are so overflowing, so choked with abundance, that they can afford to throw away more calories in a single afternoon than the entire Afrika Korps received in a month? The propaganda in Berlin had screamed about U-boats starving England, about America being weak. But looking at the wake of the ship, churning with discarded white bread, Zimmerman knew the truth. The U-boats had failed. The blockade was a joke. The Americans weren't just crossing the ocean. They were paving it with their surplus. And they were coming for Germany. Then came the journey inland. The train rumbles west, deep into the American interior. It is late, past midnight. In the velvet plush seats of the Pullman coach, a carriage more luxurious than any hotel room he had ever rented in Berlin, Werner Burkhardt cannot sleep. He presses his forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the world should be black. In Europe, darkness is the law. In Europe, a single lit match can invite a British bomb. In Europe, the night belongs to the RAF. But here? Burkhardt blinks, thinking his eyes are deceiving him. The landscape is not dark. It is ablaze. They pass a farmhouse in the middle of the Texas void. It glows like a supernova. The porch light is on. The barn light is on. Lights in the kitchen. Lights in the upstairs bedroom. No blackout curtains. No fear, just raw, unadulterated electricity bleeding out into the night. And it's not just one house, it's every house. Every street corner, every gas station, and every nameless town they thunder past. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro. An endless constellation of tungsten and neon stretching to the horizon. Burkhardt pulls his diary from his tunic. His hand shakes as he writes. The Americans are lying to us. This must be propaganda. They must be staging this for our benefit. But then he looks at the cars waiting at the crossings. Hundreds of them. Not military vehicles. Civilian cars. Headlights on high beam cutting through the steam of the train. He realizes with a sickening jolt that this isn't a show. This is just Tuesday. While Germany scrounges for coal to keep its factories running for 4 hours a day, America is burning gigawatts of power to light up empty front porches. Obergefreiter Meyer, sitting across from him, whispers what they are both thinking. If they have enough electricity to light up a chicken coop in the middle of nowhere, imagine what they are feeding their aluminum smelters. The light didn't bring hope, it brought despair. Because light requires energy, and energy runs tanks. Energy flies bombers. Energy smelts steel. As the train screams past another blazing town, Burckhardt realizes the terrifying truth. Germany is fighting a war against a nation that has harnessed the sun itself. And they are using it to read comic books in bed at midnight. Autumn, 1944. The war in Europe is grinding into a bloody stalemate at the Siegfried Line, but in the mess hall of Camp Crossville, the war is invisible. Werner Burckhardt sits down at a long wooden table. He groans. It is the groan of a man whose belt no longer fits. He looks down at his waist. The tunic that hung loosely on his frame in Tunisia now cuts into his skin. He unbuttons the top button. Relief. He picks up his fork. On his tray there is a pork chop the size of a shovel blade, a mountain of mashed potatoes drowning in butter, green beans, and of course ice cream. Vanilla today. Again. Burckhardt looks around the hall. He sees thousands of men who look nothing like prisoners. They are tanned, they are muscular, they are heavy. The average German prisoner in the United States gained 22 kilograms, nearly 50 pounds during their captivity. 50 pounds. Think about the biology of that. While the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front is freezing in trenches, scraping mold off frozen horse meat to survive, their captured comrades in Texas are suffering from indigestion caused by overeating. It is a grotesque paradox. The mathematics of gluttony. An American prisoner in Germany survives on 1,200 calories a day, if he is lucky. A German prisoner in America is force-fed 4,000. But the true horror comes not from the food, but from the mail. Burckhardt pulls a letter from his pocket. It arrived yesterday from Hamburg. His mother's handwriting is shaky. She writes of the bombings. She writes of the soup kitchens where they boil potato peelings. She writes that she is hungry. Always hungry. Burckhardt looks at his pork chop. He looks at the ice cream melting into a white puddle. The guilt hits him like a physical blow. He stands up. He cannot eat. He walks to the camp canteen. He takes out his scrip, the money he earned picking cotton for American farmers. He buys chocolate, Hershey's, Nestlé. He buys soap. He buys coffee. He packs them into a box. He is sending a care package to Germany. Pause and consider the absurdity of this moment. A prisoner of war, locked in an enemy camp, is sending food aid to the citizens of the master race. The propaganda said the Aryans were superior. The propaganda said the Americans were weak mongrels. But here stands Burckhardt, the defeated soldier, feeding the starving victors with the crumbs of American abundance. He tapes the box shut. He writes the address in Hamburg. He hands it to the American clerk. The clerk doesn't sneer. He doesn't laugh. He just stamps it. Next, he says. Next. The efficiency is terrifying. The Americans are so rich, so overflowing with resources, that they allow their prisoners to use the U.S. mail system to feed the enemy's population. Burckhardt walks back out into the sun. He touches his stomach. He feels sick. Not from the food, but from the realization that every ounce of fat on his body is a billboard for Germany's defeat. May 8th, 1945. The guns finally fall silent. The 1,000-year Reich lasted only 12 years, and now it lies in ruins. Across Europe, cities are skeletons of brick and twisted steel, but in America, the trains are loading up again, not to send men to war, but to send them home. Werner Burckhardt stands on the platform. He is wearing a new suit provided by the U.S. government. He has money in his pocket. He is healthy. In fact, he is leaving captivity in better physical condition than when he entered the army. As he boards the ship back to a broken Germany, he carries no weapon, he carries no map. But he carries something far more dangerous to totalitarianism than a rifle. He carries a memory. The memory of a nation where the lights never go out, where the trains run on time, not because of fear, but because of efficiency, where a common soldier can drink the same soda as a general. When these 370,000 prisoners returned to Germany, they did not return as Nazis. They returned as witnesses. They had seen the alternative. They had tasted it. And they knew with absolute certainty that a system built on hate could never compete with a system built on production. They rebuilt West Germany not on the model of Prussia, but on the model of Pennsylvania, of Texas, of Detroit. They became the architects of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle that rose from the ashes. Historians often debate what weapon won the war. Was it the atomic bomb? The Sherman tank? The P-51 Mustang? Perhaps, but ask Werner Burkhardt. Ask the men who surrendered in the desert and woke up in the land of plenty. They will tell you that the most powerful weapon in the American arsenal was not made of explosive. It was made of sugar, milk, and cocoa beans. It was the undeniable, overwhelming, and terrifying power of a 5-cent soda. Because you can force a man to surrender with a gun, but if you want to change his soul, you don't shoot him, you feed him.